Hey everyone, and welcome to Balrog's Game Room, where today, something's been eating at me. As you may have noticed by now, I love Earthbound. It's one of my favorite games of all time, from its quirkiness to its combat system, to the story that'll tear your heart at every moment it can. To me and many other gamers, it's nothing short of a masterpiece. And then there's the prequel. At the 2015 Nintendo World Championships, which I still can't believe happened, it was so freaking cool! The director of the Mother series, Shigesato Itoi, came on screen. He said he wanted to show gamers all over the world one of his earlier works, a game that was completely translated in English and ready to go in 1990, but never saw the light of day. Earthbound. 2 words. You may know it as its Japanese title, Mother. Anyway, the game has been released on Wii U Virtual Console under the title EarthBound Beginnings, and of course gamers all over the world lost their minds, including myself. I am tough enough to admit that. It's finally here. But that excitement slowly turned into boredom, frustration, and overall just a bunch of mixed feelings when I played the game. So welcome to my Thoughts On series, where I give my 2 cents on any gaming topic in the industry, and today's thought is, if Earthbound Beginnings has aged well. So my history with Earthbound Beginnings started right after I beat Earthbound the first time. I read online about a prototype ROM that had been released to the public, an English version of Earthbound. Remember, 2 words! Modded to be called Earthbound Zero. And if that wasn't cool enough, this version had new features like an extended ending, a run button, which actually just made the game run faster, but you get the idea. A few censorships, and a ton of stuff to make the game easier, like simplifying dungeons. But at the end of the day, it's still a freaking old school NES RPG! I played this game for a few hours, and I got really frustrated. You see, back in the old days where Dragon Warrior was king and Final Fantasy started not being the Final Fantasy, level grinding was abundant. Every town, every new area, you gotta go outside and whack a bunch of stuff with your sword and magic. Barriers were less common, so any point in time you could walk the wrong way and run away, come on, run! And of course, there's the currency systems that like to give you barely enough for a new weapon. But surprisingly, Earthbound Beginnings avoids a lot of this. When you are defeated in battle, you don't lose your progress. You can respawn at the previous town with half of the money you were holding at the time. If you go the wrong way or want to backtrack, you can buy some bread and leave a crumb trail, so you can teleport back to that spot you used it. Heck, even if you get a game over, you can still go back to that spot. Despite these conveniences though, the level grinding was still here in spades. Almost every single time you enter a new place, you gotta stop what you're doing and level up your characters for at least half an hour. Also, when you get other party members, some of them start at level 1, and you gotta spend about 2 hours each getting them to a half-decent level. And on top of that, you gotta teleport to Magicant, a magical world in the game, to get defense items for your party, an absolute necessity if you don't want to spend thousands in hospital fees reviving them. Now this all doesn't sound so bad, until you realize that every time you have to go to Magicant before you get teleport, which I didn't get until I was 2/3 through the game, you cannot use bread and have to go through a dungeon to leave Magicant and then use the bread. It gets old really quickly. And don't even get me started on the world design. I mean, just look at this level. Look at the swamp, look at the factory. Now imagine every 3 steps you're getting stopped to fight some really strong monsters. I just want to strangle this stupid game. All those years ago, I eventually lost my patience and went on message boards to see if people were having similar issues. And to my surprise, they were! I wasn't the wimp! In fact, gamers were so irked that they made a patch that doubles experience and money obtained for monsters. And with that, well, I had a blast! I started seeing all the great things about Earthbound Zero. It was essentially a simplistic Earthbound. Instead of being some badass knight trying to slay some dragons, you're a boy growing up in the 90s with psychic powers who has to stop an alien race from destroying the world. Enemies aren't slimes or goblins, they're crows with legs, gang leaders, and, Wallies? But I'm Wally. I don't see no resemblance. And most importantly, the writing is just fantastic, with locals being all snarky and direct, and your party members all being likable and sharing their own reasons for fighting as well. There's just something about playing a game in a modern world that makes the setting more relatable. There's even classic moments that I put right up there with the Super Nintendo Earthbound. There's a dude in the desert that'll take you on plane rides all across the world. There's a spooky mansion with dialogue that feels like it's straight out of a creepypasta. And, well, there's a tank. You can ride it all over the desert, go to an enemy, and fire shots at it. It's freaking wonderful. So with all this in mind, when Earthbound Beginnings came out on Virtual Console, the first thing I thought was, oh please make the game easier! And it turns out it's straight up the beta ROM that surfaced on the internet back in the 90s. And right then and there, I knew this was gonna be unpleasant. It had been 3 years since I played it with the Easy Patch, so I thought maybe I was just a wimp back then. And after replaying it, I noticed it was less about being hard and more about just being repetitive and inconveniencing me at every corner. You see, the game has a lot of fundamental RPG issues, but eventually get fixes as you progress through the game. For instance, the encounter rate is just a freaking mess. You can continuously run into enemies just one step after you finish a battle. In fact, no matter how weak the enemy is, running away is never a guarantee, and it sucks. However, Nintendo eventually gets a PSI power called the 4th D slip, or 4th dimension slip, which guarantees escaping non-boss battles. But the downside is that it takes 12 PSI points, which is a pretty huge chunk, so you can only use it when you really need it. Another solution is if you open the menu. I don't know if this was intentional, but by doing so, you reset the encounter rate, so if you do that every few steps, you may miss a few battles. And to avoid even more battles, you can eventually buy an item called the Repel Ring, which keeps away those weaker enemies and actually lets you explore somewhat peacefully. Which is what I would have said if Nintendo had more than 8 freaking slots for both key items and regular stuff. And if that wasn't bad enough, there are very few places you can actually store your items, and one of them involves going all the way back home and talking to your sister to hold items. It's ridiculous! And even though other party members can also hold 8 items, you're stuck with Nintendo for about a third of the game, which for me was 6 grueling hours. Grabbing an item you need by dropping another item you need and rebuying it later is just plain stupid. But once again, if you stick with the game long enough, you learn teleport from a baby! Okay, you're making fun of me now, right? So if you want to store items, then it'll be way easier. At the end of the day though, these weren't deal breakers or anything. I mean, if they were, I would have stopped playing ages ago. They were just annoying things I wish I didn't have to deal with. So all of this brings us back to the question we started with. Has Earthbound Beginnings aged well? And I think it honestly depends on the perception of the player. There is a fantastic game to be played here, but it's buried under archaic RPG tropes. You will spend hours of your life in auto mode grinding your life away, and it's hard to multitask since you will frequently have to heal and all that. But this isn't always a negative. There are some people out there who like level grinding, and I get why. It gives you a feeling of satisfaction once you whack a million crows and wallies out of existence without any trouble, and it feels like you're growing as a player. So if you're one of those people, knock yourself out. This game's right up your alley, and to you, it'll have aged wonderfully. But personally, if I didn't have the experience patch, I never would have beaten it the first time for my lack of patience. And it was me, as the game put it, grin and bearing the repetitive parts that kept me going the second time. In a world where RPGs do their best to not repeat themselves, Earthbound Beginnings experience and inventory systems have aged a little poorly. But this is where things get interesting. My answer isn't just a straight up no. There were a lot of things about this game that were ahead of its time. Quirky, well-translated dialogue, a modernized setting, a story that goes beyond the normal defeat the bad guy and save blank, blank, and blank. This game gets stuff right that even today's RPGs struggle with. Now I'm not just gonna sit here and recommend downloading a ROM with an easy patch, cause you know, it's kinda bad. But it's the way I enjoy playing the game the most. However, if you're like me and want to support Nintendo for re-releasing this, I recommend the game to people who can deal with level grinding. And even if you don't, you may end up like me and change your mind. It's definitely a gem worth $7. With some dirt, you gotta grind off of it sometimes. But hey, this is just my opinion. What do you think about Earthbound Beginnings? Do you like the level grinding, or wish it wasn't there? Do you like grinding in general? Well, that's a questionable question. Let me know in the comments what you think. Now, if you'll excuse me, I got a boy with psychic powers I gotta beat up. Hopefully by the time I'm here again, Mother 3 will be out. Oh, my back! Like Spades, like the card game, Spades. That's a card game, right? Or is that just like the card that's used in the game Blackjack, or any card game that uses 52 cards? Okay, I'm gonna drink some water now. I don't know a thing I'm saying, but I know spades is a metaphor or something, so I'm gonna use it like that. Spades. And of course, fans of the series lost their minds, including myself. I am tough enough to admit that.